Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed lunch. At least I did. I love the Spanish food. I hope you all did too. This is actually the first session in the GSTC on business travel, so we are very excited. I'm also a bit nervous, to be honest, so I hope you have patience with me. Slido, I think that was explained earlier. I don't know if anybody still needs an explanation, but you can use Slido to ask your questions. And I have maybe a very weird question to you as an audience, because this is the first session on business travel. Does anyone in the room not know what business travel is? Everyone knows what business travel is. Okay, so then we have a good audience. We need no more further explanation. And does everybody know the difference between a normal travel agency and a TMC, so a travel management company that we normally use within business travel? Does anyone need an explanation on that? Yes? Okay. Well, a TMC, like it says, it's a travel management company, and it's a sort of a travel agent, but they focus on corporate travel. So everything that is related to corporate travel, they are actually the facilitator, and they work with a lot of suppliers in our industry. So with the airlines, with the hotels, with the online booking tools, etc. And we will discuss the role of the TMC further on in this session to see how a TMC can play a role in accelerating sustainability in business travel. Then I need to be really honest, and it's due to Ulf and also Paul Peters, who is in the audience, that we were discussing, is business travel part of tourism? And I thought, no, it isn't. It's completely separate. And then I looked up the definition, and it says it's traveling to a destination outside your normal environment because of recreation or business. And it should not last longer than a consecutive year. So I must say business travel is part of tourism, and it should not be seen separate, so it's also part of what the GSTC is doing. Business travel is also a very complex ecosystem. We have many suppliers, we have many systems, we have a lot of money flowing everywhere, where a lot of it is invisible. Charles will explain a little bit more about that ecosystem. And we've seen lately, over the past 2 years, I think, and COVID was an accelerator also for that, an awareness on sustainability in business travel, especially amongst travel managers. And travel managers are the persons responsible for business travel, a corporate program within a corporation. But they need help. They need help from us as an industry. They need help from their senior management. And that is sometimes very much a challenge. Then we are not all talking about lowering emissions. Sustainability in business travel is also about duty of care, traveler well-being, and also diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now that I'm talking about that, I'm about to introduce the panel, but I do want to say something that Kit was telling me. Kit Brennan, Kit Aspen, I should say, formerly known as Brennan, and I asked him, how come that you have changed your surname? Because normally you see that only with women. And he told me this morning that he and his wife decided when they got married to both change their surname. And I thought that was a really good example of equality, and I wanted to share that with you because I really liked it. And I don't think in a lot of countries it's possible to do it, but apparently in the UK it is. So I'm sorry, I had to share this. So, what else did I want to say? There are a lot of initiatives within the business travel industry. So we have different associations, and recently a lot of the European associations have combined and formed the BT for Europe, so Business Travel for Europe. They created 2 position papers for the EU government, and one of them is asking for 3 of the topics that I take out of that. Unified standard for CO2 emissions calculation methodology, because currently there are several methodologies being used. And one of the examples that was lately published is that a travel manager was using 5 different online booking tools to book their travel in 5 different regions. And she was looking up a flight from London to New York. and she was looking up what is the emission on that flight, and she got 5 different answers. And the first and the last answer, there was a difference in 50%. So that indicates that we really need to have a standardization in calculation methodology. The other thing that they said, that train travel should be fully integrated in the overall booking process. So I don't know who of you have ever tried to book train within Europe, but it's a hassle. It's a real hassle, and it's not at all coming close anywhere to if you want to book your flight. I experienced it myself coming here, and it was really a hassle. And then the third one that we also probably will discuss today is the COT reporting. So the data should be made obligatory for companies and also free of charge. And I think there are some different opinions about that, whether or not it should be free of charge. So this is something that we will be talking about. Then I want to share with you that I'm from the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands there is a coalition that's called Anders Reizen, so travel differently is the explanation. And they have also asked the EU, for example, for more trains between the EU continental and the UK, because if you want to travel between Amsterdam and London, there are like 40 flights and only 4 trains a day. And these 70 companies have said to the EU, we as 70 companies, we want to travel by train between the Netherlands and the UK, but you need to help us. We need more train travel, and we need it organized. So this is more my introduction. Then I'll introduce our panelists. The first one here on my right is Charles, and he likes to be called Charlie Sullivan. He's Vice President Product Development for CWT's travel management portfolio, which includes substantial business tools. And he will explain a little bit more about our complex ecosystem. Then next to him, we have Ulf Sonntag. I think you've seen him in the former session. He is the Managing Director of the NIT, Institute of Tourism Research in Northern Europe, based in Germany, in Kiel. And he will talk about the results of their RA business, I'm not sure what it means, but you'll explain to us, study, which covers the volume, the behavior, and attitudes of overnight business travelers from Germany since 2019, with 2,000 representative interviews per year. And then we have Kit Aspen, and he is one of the founders of Thrust Carbon, a sustainable intelligence business on a mission to make travel effortlessly green. Their intelligence is used by some of the world's largest corporates, as well as 5 of the world's top 10 TMCs. In total, their data powers sustainability for $52 billion of annual travel spent. So I'll sit down now, and you can start with your presentations. And I want to explain, after the presentations, I have prepared 2 questions that I would like to start with, and I think they will gain a lot of questions from the audience. So if you allow us, that we'll start with my questions before starting answering the Slido questions.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. Before I get in I have a single slide. Oh, I was going to say, before I even get into this, I wanted to demonstrate something just based on personal experience on what the misalignment, and I wanted to kind of recast the challenge that we have, particularly as it relates to business travel. So early in my career, we had introduced, and this was not with CWT, it was with a different company, we introduced a service for our clients. Somehow during the introduction of that service, we had a unacceptable wait time, response time, or is what we were calling latency. And so we had to bring a team together to understand how we were going to address that. As it turned out, there were 9 different teams responsible for delivering that one service. We brought them in a room, sat down, and started to talk about what they could do to reduce what amounted to be 13 seconds of latency, and we were looking for sub-second response time, okay? So we bring them in a room, everybody talks about individually what they're doing and what they've done to reduce it, and everybody is on green, so to speak. They're all good individually. Yet somehow, as a company, we had 13 seconds of response or latency in the system. So you ask yourself, and we sat down and said this to them, how can everybody be green and say that they're good when as a company, we've added 13 seconds of response time to our clients? It's unacceptable, right? So what we had to do is we had to recast that challenge into a we problem. We have a 13-second response time issue. We need to address that. And then we also had to cast it as, hey, you really need to, this is a participation sport, you need to dig in. It's our 13 seconds, it's a we problem, it's not a me problem, or, hey, just because my API service is working within tolerance, hey, I'm good to go. It wasn't that. And I think, I draw on that a lot in my career, and I think this is another example of that. So when you look at the complexity, and this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, so the folks here, it's just kind of to represent the complexity of what has to align. Okay, so if you look at the top line, you have regulations, right? And I'm sure you follow sustainability just like I do. You see a lot of really good things coming out. I think within the last 2 weeks, Europe just approved the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. That's great. The SEC in the States, the Security Exchange Commission, has also discussed what they're going to require from a reporting perspective. I think France, within the last 2 weeks, finalized the ban on short-haul routes. So routes that are flights that are less than 2.5 hours. The mandate is for three specific routes. Those are going to have to be by train, to your point earlier. So a lot of good stuff happening in the regulation space, right? Drop down to the, in the corporate space or the innovation space here, data and availability and the consolidation. We have groups like KIT and Thrust Carbon. Data availability, particularly as it relates to sustainable information and the calculation methodologies and the transparency, is improving. It's improving month over month, quarter over quarter. To your point earlier, do you wind up with 5 different methodologies? That's one of the alignment things, one of the alignment issues we have, because absolutely when you have an OBT, online booking tool, that has one methodology, you have a GDS that has another methodology, you potentially have a TMC that has a third methodology, and then you have your corporate methodology. That's 4 right there. I'm missing the 5th one, but we'll find it. Right? So a lot of good things happen in the innovation space. On the company side, I read a report that 58% of Fortune 500 companies have net zero goals. Okay? Decent, above 50. 78% of those are in Europe. So 78% of the Fortune 500 are in Europe. That's good. It's not 100%, but it's good. So we have activity in the corporate space. On the corporate travel space, the space I'm in, CWT is a TMC. Sustainability is a top five priority for every client we talk to. Yet, if you listen to GBTA, only 38% of corporates have actually incorporated a sustainability component into their purchasing programs or into their travel programs, right? Go down a little, and that's the policy piece. And then the traveler. To me, the traveler, in most cases, we're knocking on open doors. What we hear from our clients and even the travelers is they're looking for more sustainable options. They want to purchase the more sustainable option. So that then it's how do you align to make sure they're seeing those at the point of sale. But you can see as you look at this here, good activity in each of these, yet we heard earlier this afternoon, I think the latest temperature increase was 1.15 degrees Celsius, and I think the goal is 1.5 degrees Celsius under 1.5. So we have a lot of really good activities, but again, are we aligned to the 1.5 degrees? Are we going to make that? And I would suggest the level of collaboration that's needed and the activity that's needed is really not quite there, right? Just the alignment he talked about earlier between the 5 different methodologies, between regulations. Regulations are great, but are they easily adopted by the corporates, by the companies? Are those easily translated into the TMC, into the corporate travel piece of it? When I talk to corporate travel folks, almost every time they've said their company has taken a very aggressive goal with regards to sustainability, which immediately forced them into being sustainability experts. So, and they're not. It's an education piece, right? I see some hands being raised. Okay, so that to me, that's every client I talk to says, can you help me with regards to education on this? So this alignment, I think, is, and then, from the policy, is it's something that the traveler can actually enact. So that alignment and that collaboration needs to be there. So when we talk about challenges, I wanted to reframe this a little bit. I didn't want to get into a bunch of stats and things, but I wanted to reframe the challenge as this is really a we problem. Unless we solve this, okay, collectively within business travel, nobody wins, right? So, and to me, it's a participation sport, meaning you're going to have to roll your sleeves up. Every travel manager I've talked to talks about all the classes they're going to, the conversations they're having with regards to other travel managers. And I think that education up and down this pipeline has to happen or continue to happen. So, I'll kick that off. I think I'm over time. I apologize. I'll kick that off as a conversation for a little bit later here. Hopefully we'll get some discussions on that alignment, and I'll leave it to Ulf.
Yeah, we are so fast, there are no slides there. So there it comes. Yeah, actually, my idea is to talk a little bit about the role of business travel, but in the whole framework of tourism and a little bit from the destination point of view. And this is, you have seen me speaking earlier about climate change and tourism in general. And usually we at NIT, we work in tourism, we work a lot for destinations, we work from the strategic side, we work a lot in market research, targeting the end consumer, usually in leisure, and asking them what they are wanting to do in their holidays. But we started 2019 to also dig into the business travel, because we had the feeling, but that was coming from a university approaching us in a research project, that we are only showing one part of tourism and not the whole story. And we wanted to, let's say, set up a survey that links with the results of the business traveler with insights we already have for numbers of years about the leisure travelers. So this is trying to be a little bit, let's say, looking at business travel from a little further away than we heard from Charlie, where we got the introduction into the ecosystem. And we're a little bit sorry that we're missing Olivia, who was actually supposed to talk at the at this second spot of our panel, and giving us a lot of insights about the industry as such and the buyer's perspective. And I asked her to borrow just one of the slides, which sets a little bit the ground about how big is the market we are talking about. And this is a recent WTTC figures. On the left-hand side, you can see the share of domestic and international spending. And more interesting for our panel is the right-hand side, where you see the business and the leisure part. And so the share globally is around 80-20, so 80% of the global spend in tourism is in leisure, 20 in business. And it's, we see the decline and the small rebound, but it has been also similar like this pre-COVID. And we can also find the same share, or almost the same share, when we look at the German data, where we have like around 100 billion spending a year, and 20-25%, depending on the year you look at, of that is business. And so, just to have this idea of the global size of the market, I jump into our data, and specifically into what the travelers tell us about sustainability. And here I think there are also some links to what Charlie said. So it's here is the first part is if you have different options for this trip, do you go for the more sustainable option? And we see a slight increase. The one who say it's really sustainability is the decisive factor of going for this option. It's from 12% up to 13% of all the business trips that we covered over a 1-year period. And it went down for the one factor of many from 25 to 28. So certain movement, but let's say, it could maybe even be a stronger dynamic if we think what are the challenges that we need to tackle in total. Where we see a little bit more dynamic is when we see if they were looking for labels about the accommodation or the meeting provider. It went up from 14% to 30%. And to have an idea what this means if we compare it with leisure, we see there is quite a difference. So especially in this decisive part, for all holiday trips, it's only 5%. For the business trips, it's already 13%, and it's also more for the one factor in many. And it's also about like triple the amount when we see if they were looking for accommodation, labels of accommodation and providers. So there must be something about it. And I think when you look closely at Charlie's slide with the ecosystem, there was the second sphere of the policy. And this is probably one of the big explanations that's behind these figures. Because then when we ask the travelers again, does your organization, your employee, have a written sustainability travel policy, we find out that for 30% of the travelers, this is true. 55, they are sure that they don't have. 16, they are unsure. But we have all kinds of travelers there. So the only selecting rule is that they have been on one business trip with one overnight in the last 12 months. So you also have self-employed, so maybe they don't really understand the question. So it makes sense. And then from this point, we asked the 30% with a policy, what is the policy about? But we also asked the other ones, even if you don't have a policy, do you act sustainably? And here is for the ones with the policy to say, what is in the policy? So what are you obliged to do? And we separated that, is it really a fixed rule? So do you have to do it? Or is there some leeway for your own decision? And we found there is still, like the share of the travelers in companies where they still have quite a lot of freedom to decide, even if there is a policy. It's the majority, but also we see in some regards there are quite strict rules. And the rules are usually there where it means cut down on trips or use the more sustainable transport. So virtual meetings instead of business trips, or combine meetings to travel less, or train instead of plane domestic, train instead of car when it's possible, public transport instead of taxi rental car. But you can also see and I think we had that at your introduction, or was it you, that we said often it's connected also with the money. So there is money saving involved. And it obviously goes best if, the sustainability goals and the money saving goes in the same direction. But also we see things like choosing a hotel with sustainability labels, choosing meetings with sustainability labels. It's already 1/4 and another 40% who can decide or should decide or should consider this. And interestingly, I don't have this as a slide, for the ones without the policy, it's a similar ranking, and especially the ones where the cost saving and the sustainability goes in the same direction. We see almost as high figures there that they're actually doing this already than with a group here with a fixed policy. Yeah, as a last slide, or second but last slide, I also wanted to show you, because that was in our discussion in the preparation a little bit, also who's responsible. And we asked the travelers who's responsible. And there they see, first of all, their employers. So it's the corporates, it's the businesses, it's the organizations, but it's also the travelers themselves. And they don't put so much the fingers, I mean, again, when you think at the spheres, to the spheres very far outside. So they're looking first in their own backyard. But on the other hand, I think there is no contradiction if there is movement in all of the spheres. So in total, I think this means there will be the transition of business travel that will continue. And sustainability is for sure one of the driving forces in this. And what what happens in business travel, and because it's happening faster and also to a higher extent than in leisure travel, I think this will affect really what will happen in the destinations and in the travel industry. So really the push right now is coming more from the business travel side than from the leisure travel side. And I think for our discussion it's also quite interesting. I think the TMCs, there might be a role for them as the agents of change and the agents who have the knowledge about how should this happen. Yeah, and I think to conclude this overall is I think the industry and the destinations definitely need to adapt and change, yeah, and be ready and flexible for what's there to come. And that was me. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you. All right. There we go. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kit Aspen. I'm one of the founders at Thrust Carbon. So today I want to take you through, I suppose, two separate sides. One is why should people care? And that's an obvious question to the people in this room. You're at a sustainability conference, you care about sustainability. But for much of the world, that question is asked a lot, right? Why should the corporate care? At the end of the day, they want to make money. What's sustainability actually mean for them? And why should we care about what business travelers are doing? One thing I want to make clear is just how huge the business travel industry is. It's, as Alf pointed out, just a huge spend. But what's also really interesting is the levers available. Because when it comes to business travel, the decision of one client can mean changes in the scale of hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2. Our largest client takes over 1 million flights a year. That's a single corporate. I'm not talking about TMCs. TMCs book tens of millions of flights a year. One corporate, over 1 million flights a year. And so by simple changes they can do, the leverage that they can put towards their preferred airlines can all of a sudden mean that the industry moves forwards in a leap. And that's really exciting. So let's start with why companies should care. Firstly, there's regulation. It's coming. It's, in many cases, in some countries, it's already here to an extent. But as we've observed, the SEC earlier this year announced carbon disclosure rules that are coming for Scope 3, which includes business travel. And then, yeah, on the 10th of November, the EU passed their Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is a whole set of rules that has to be implemented by every single country in the EU, in their domestic law, that says by 2024, every corporate over a certain size, and that threshold's actually surprisingly low, over a certain size will have to report on their emissions from Scope 3 business travel. Unfortunately, unfortunately, because it's a directive, it requires every country to implement this individually, and what we're probably going to see is multi-methodology becoming a new requirement. We're probably going to see France saying that they'd like people to use ADAME, which is the French methodology for calculating carbon emissions. We might see Germany demanding Atmosphere, which is a kind of spin-out of the German government and also has a methodology for carbon calculations. And we're going to see other countries probably requiring similar. So almost we don't have a solution to the problem pointed out at the start, which is a huge problem, which we're going to discuss soon. But it's probably almost going to be a legal requirement soon. So hopefully one thing we can look at is how can there be harmonization between these. And then one other thing I'd like to say is now is not the time for creative carbon accounting. Again, to all of us in this room, we hopefully all think that you shouldn't play any games with your carbon accounts anyway. You should try and report as accurately as possible. But certainly when you have the EU breathing down your neck, you've got the SEC breathing down your neck, it's definitely not the time. And when we discuss how there's some methodologies which are almost double the emissions of other methodologies, that's often due to just one element, which is the non-CO2 effect of aviation. And some methodologies just ignore it, and others include it. And there's a reason why there's a disparity there. But ultimately, it leads to this massive confusion because you can go to one booking portal and see one number, and you can go to another booking portal and see another number, and that's just not good. So now's not the time. It's worth taking the safe number, the trusted numbers, and going from there while the rules are being defined. Why should a company care? Well, ultimately, sustainable businesses do better. They make a lot more money, and if you're talking about a billion-dollar corporate, we're talking a lot more money, tens of millions of euros every single year. And it's a really big factor in where people work. For millennials and Gen Z, it is the single most important factor in where they work, and overall, 53% of people say it's a significant factor. And when you look at the cost of hiring, on average, it costs anywhere between $6,000 and $20,000 to hire a new employee for most businesses. All of a sudden, you can have these huge financial effects if you put sustainability at the forefront of what you do. And finally, the cost of an adverse ESG event, greenwashing, can have a huge effect on your business as well. And again, if a business is at a large scale, these effects really add up. And when you take all this into account, the cost of mitigation actually looks quite affordable. To take the classic example of greenwashing, ask Volkswagen if it was worth it. Because in the end, it cost them 35 billion euros. Probably wasn't worth it. It was probably worth doing properly the right way to begin with. So in terms of kind of where the industry has moved and what we're going to see in business travel, the old approach was very simple, and at the end of the year, a travel manager, was typically one or two or three people at a corporate who deal with their whole travel program. They'll normally hire a TMC to do all the operational aspect, but there'll be a couple people at a corporate who will ultimately be in charge of the travel program. That travel manager, at the end of the year, would get a report that says, okay, last year we emitted X thousand tons of CO2. What do you do with that? You can't go back, you can't change what's already happened, so you've either met your target or you've missed it. That's it. You can't do much. And so your lever, if all you've got is one number, your lever is to say, well, we'll just reduce travel to reduce our emissions. And that doesn't end up happening because ultimately the business wants to travel because they want to make more money is the conventional way of seeing the equation. And so that always gets prioritized, companies miss their goals. And then on the remove aspect, offsets were the only tool available. What's now happening with the kind of most forward-thinking TMCs and corporates is pinpoint accuracy, knowing on a daily basis what their emissions are. For all the flights people have booked in the months ahead, what are the emissions of that? And giving them tools so that they can analyze those emissions, understand, optimize who they're going to fly with on a particular route. We're starting to see airlines prioritize the aircraft that they put on their most competitive routes to be their most sustainable aircraft, so that travelers will try and choose the more sustainable option and they'll win more business. And that's great ultimately for the industry because that means that there's a financial benefit for an airline, for a hotel, whoever it may be, to be more sustainable. And then on the removal side, we have SAF, so sustainable aviation fuel. So this is fuel that's been made from plants or typically plants, or waste fuel, feedstocks, waste cooking oil turned into aviation fuel. It's got a much lower carbon footprint. It's great. We're going to talk a lot about it. It's seen as the future. If it is, questionable. And you've also got direct air capture. And then the future approach is the next level of data. So one of the reasons for so many carbon methodologies is no one knows how much fuel is actually being burnt on an aircraft. Airlines don't share that data. It's highly competitive. But as a result, every methodology out there is having to try and predict what the emissions burnt were. As we move forward, there's going to be more and more supplier-level data. And I think we're going to see it in other industries first. We're going to see it in probably hotel and car before we see it in aviation. And then, how do we change people's behavior? Well, there's rewarding choices, and there's also having business class that's actually sustainable. Too often, we think of sustainability as just travel less, but but traveling's great. We're all here because we wanted to visit Seville, on one level at least. I know I did. And we don't want a world where people can't travel. So it's a question of how do we make it a positive? If someone's not flying business class, if they're flying economy, can the corporate do something to make up for that? Can they instead put them in a nicer hotel? It's got slightly higher emissions on the hotel side, but ultimately you're going to save a lot more emissions from not having the business class travel. And finally, on the removal side, starting to look more at nature positive and net negative. So let's not just get to a baseline of net zero, but how can we actually travel and leave a positive footprint on the world? Finally, I'm very much running out of time, but we've got kind of the new pillar of a TMC. In the past, TMCs were understandably not too worried about sustainability. It's not really their core ballpark. Now it's a core pillar. And so there's lots of options, and they're really one of the places providing data, and we power that as well. But anyway, that's me. I'm looking forward to discussing more, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Kit.
Thanks.
Not sure if I need time. So, my first question, sorry. And I think I'll start with you, Kit, because I think you almost gave the answer in your last slide, after format slide, is that what do you think is needed to achieve the sustainability goals that we have for 2030? And there are certain corporates, and you also mentioned there are quite a few companies that have already committed to net zero with the SBTi. So what do they need to do with regards to business travel to reach that goal? And with help from the industry.
Yeah. So 2030, the kind of IPCC goal is 50% reduction on emissions from baseline. And it depends on what channel we're looking at, what sector. The very difficult answer is for aviation, I don't think it can be met. It's the plain and simple truth. Aviation is expected to grow 3.6% every single year from now till 2050. Planes get about between 1.3 and 2.5% more efficient every year. And so just balancing those alone, there's going to be a growth in emissions. Sustainable aviation fuel currently accounts for about 0.1% of all fuel going into aircraft. To get that to any meaningful amount by 2030, it's not going to happen. The current goal is to get to 10% by 2030, and even that's really pushing it, because that's a 100x increase from the 0.1%. I think in other industries it's more likely. One of the main ways of decarbonizing rail is to decarbonize our electricity systems, right? Because particularly for electric trains, how do you get cleaner electricity going into it? And I think that's more feasible. Certainly many countries are on track to reach a 50% reduction. Not all, many are. A hotel, depends on the hotel, but it's possible. Again, it requires investment, but I think many hotels will achieve it, especially when you consider the baseline year for the IPCC is not this year. It's, you're going to have to prompt me here. I think 2012, 2016? Anyway, it's not this year. So it doesn't mean reducing 50% from 2022. We're already kind of, a lot is underway already. So in terms of 2030, it's going to be really hard for aviation, and hopefully we'll see other industries pick up the slack. It's not okay to say that. That's not a good thing to have to say, but it's kind of the reality of the situation. The only way it could be met is if airlines stop flying, and that's not realistic, unfortunately. So.
But do you think that corporates can accelerate this? Because I've seen in the past 2 years clients of mine that are requiring the sustainability they are including sustainability questions into their RFPs, where before they didn't. And with the GBTA conference in Brussels lately, people were really advertising SAF to that will be the solution for our industry, which, like you said, I don't believe that, because it's only 0.04, I think, percent, or 0.1%. So, and there needs to be, they need to build plans for hydrogen, I think, to also include that, and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah. I think on a corporate level, plenty of corporates will achieve it. We're working with lots who have viable plans. Ultimately, it comes down to a combination of the SAF that is available is being bought up by corporates, so some corporates are going to be able to factor that in more than 0.1% into their final emissions reports. It's worth saying, when you use SAF, you're able to subtract it from your scope 3 calculations. It's actually one of the only forms of sequestration of carbon at this time that is allowed by the Net Zero Initiative and SBTi. So there are many corporates that are going to do it. It's just, I think it's partly, while corporate travel is pretty much recovered from the pandemic, leisure travel has exceeded pre-pandemic levels. And I think even if corporates continue to cut down on their travel, I actually think much of that gap would be picked up by leisure, unfortunately.
Thank you. And what do you think, Charlie?
So taking into account everything Kit just said, absolutely agree, particularly as it relates to, agree the difficulty as it relates to the aviation piece. And some of our clients are reporting 94% of their overall carbon footprint is on the air side, right? And then with the SAF availability where it's at, some of our clients, especially the larger ones, are actually moving ahead and purchasing SAF, right, for those offsets. Aside from that, though, I think there are some things that corporates can do, and that has to do with, as you look at, and you had it on your slide, Kit, if you look at why are people traveling, because there's going to be a volume reduction. Okay, so understand, why are people traveling? Are there eliminations that can be done there? Are there eliminations that you can move from air to rail? And is it effective, which is one of your questions I know you have coming up. Is it truly an alternative? How many single-purpose trips are people taking, right? Like single-use plastic, eliminate single-use plastic, eliminate single-use trips, and be able to expand more. And we're seeing that before the pandemic. I think multi-city trips were under 40%. Immediately after the pandemic, I think it went to a high of 68%. And we're right now stabilized at just under 60%. So we are seeing more done within the individual trips. So I think that analysis, understanding who's traveling, why they're traveling, is there volume that can be taken out, I think are some of the near-term levers that can be pulled. We also have folks looking at, moving, what is their policy with regards to business class versus economy class, and are there avenues there for them? And then what's the corresponding, to Kit's point earlier, what's the corresponding not offset benefit that needs to happen? So, hey, I don't get to fly business, but I have access to a shower immediately upon landing. What am I doing with lounge access, things like that? So I think that those are all levers that I think are probably more immediate that can be pulled while the industry, especially on the aviation side, starts to decarbonize. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. But do you also think, because I think you mentioned that about collaboration, because we have lots of initiatives in our industry, I think, and my personal opinion is that they're so siloed. They're all different institutions, associations, they're doing a lot of good stuff, but we don't get where we need to be if we do not collaborate. And what do you think about that?
I completely agree. We need to. When you look at even what the airlines are doing, right? The airlines have come out and said, if we want to have, and you mentioned this earlier, we were at a conference, I think it takes 7 years from when you want to build a plant to when the plant would actually be operational. So that's a really long time. So when we're talking to, and I talk to suppliers, air, hotel, car suppliers, what they're talking about is, if you want to be able to have the supply, we need to start showing the demand for that, which is why you're seeing, from a collaboration perspective, some corporates actually buying advanced SAF, right? Creates a little bit of an issue how you account for the carbon credits, because more SAF, the demand for the credits is greater than the actual supply of SAF right now. So that piece of it. So I think it does. And I think the collaboration is also, as a corporate buyer, what are you talking, how are you talking to your suppliers? Are you making, again, This is a we problem. Are you making your problem their problem?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And they need to understand that, whether that's air, car, hotel, or even the rail side.
Yeah. And Ulf, have you anything to add?
Yeah, but I think it's playing the ball over to you, because I remember from our preparatory talk, I think you said airlines are not competing about safety, and they shouldn't compete about sustainability either. So, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think it was Charlie who said that. I like that a lot too.
My background, I've been in travel for over 30 years, and one of the things, and on the aviation side, particularly on distribution, and one of the things within the airlines don't compete on safety. They don't. If they find a better mousetrap, every airline knows it the next day, right? And I think sustainability has to reach that level that, hey, we shouldn't be competing on that, whether that's data, which I know you want to talk about later, or a better mousetrap. I think it needs to be at that level, given the sense of urgency we're at. Yep.
But how do you see that competition between TMCs? Because my experience I'm in this industry for over 30 years now, and there's always such a huge competition between TMCs, which is, to my opinion, a lot of times the cause why nothing is happening. So how do you think you can make sure that the competition on sustainability will be gone?
Geez, so on the TMC side.
A surprise question, right?
No, so on the TMC side, right? I think the first part of it is making sure that all the clients certainly have access to the right information, and everything is transparent. There shouldn't be a transparency issue, right?
But there is right now.
I would say it depends. And just speaking for my TMC, we've been providing carbon calculation information for our clients for 13 years, right? It's based on the DEFRA piece, and over the last year we've moved to thrust carbon. We published that methodology, right? We published that methodology, very transparent, and we're transparent with regards to where we're going, and signal that 86% of our clients said that they wanted to see the carbon information at the point of sale, something that you had on yours. Within 2 months of having the relationship with Thrust Carbon, we got that out there. We didn't hide it. It's, hey, this is our game plan on, and it's very similar to, I think it's the Greenhouse Gas Council, or it's a similar game plan. It's a calculate, reduce, and then what you can't reduce, offset. It's similar to our competitors. And then to me, where the value comes in is, and this is probably where we compete more, is on the consultative side, right? Here's the data, what are the insights, what are the benchmarking, those kind of things, components of it. But I would say on sustainability right now, we're fairly transparent. I know if Olivia was here, I'm fairly comfortable. I know what Olivia and her company is doing with regards to
For the audience, Olivia is from BCD Travel, which is a competing TMC.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. No, but also what I'm thinking about is this is great, but it's all after the fact. And what we really need is when people make a decision, they can make the right decision. So what I say is you have to show what matters, to whom it matters, at the time it matters. So it means when somebody is in an online booking tool and he wants to book a trip, and he has the choice, do I go by train or do I go by plane? He needs to see the correct numbers. And currently that's not the case. They see an average on airlines with the CO2 emission. They do see the train, but it's not possible, and train is not integrated. And I would have thought that if we as an industry, we collaborate a lot more, and TMCs get loose of that competition, then we could thrive to getting that done on all the online booking tools that we're using, and getting the information that the users need at time of booking visible for them. And then we can reduce a lot more, rather than after the fact show the reports and it takes another year before something happens, because that's what's happening then. So this is something that I'm looking for in our industry. We need to accelerate this, and we need to make sure that at time of booking, when the decision is made, there you need to have that number.
So I completely agree. Otherwise, it's what we call as you're driving with the rear view mirror, right? You have to have that at point of sale, at point of decision. Completely agree. We as an industry don't have the rail integrated in with air, so you can see that comparison. I probably disagree on are we providing the CO2 information and is it clear at point of sale? I think we are. It could be five different pieces. I think the bigger issue though is that information that we're providing enough to change behavior? Does somebody understand CO2 calculation is, it's 545 kilograms, okay, what does that mean? I know that Thrust has kind of indicators on that's production of this many chocolate bars, et cetera. I think we can do a better job of drawing the straighter line to. This information means this to your policy, this information means this to your budget, et cetera. Would agree with that.
Yeah, that would be. And like, I like the lowest logical emission rather than the lowest logical fare, because nowadays a lot of policies for corporates are based on the lowest logical fare. So when you start booking, you always look at, this is our policy, you have not taken the lowest fare, so you're out of policy, and you need to say, why are you out of policy? So that needs to change, I think, to lowest logical emission. Why did you not select the best sustainable option?
Let me just real quickly, and then I'll let Kit or Rolf go. So on that point in particular, because I've had that conversation with corporates with regards to where does carbon come in the decision process? Yeah. And right now, cost. I agree. Is it? What we've said is, you know, where would, if you were weighting it, where is it? And it's getting higher in weighting, and should we start to, is it the tiebreaker at some point? Hey, cost is the same, tiebreaker. How do I make sure that the lower emission is getting seen? The lowest logical emission, just flipping to that across your corporate program. My understanding, and I'm sure we have some corporate buyers here, is the single biggest issue folks have with incorporating sustainability policies into their policy is they don't know what the incremental cost is going to be. And until we can actually show some transparency, and it's coming, right? We're working through that. That piece of it, I think, has to come hand in hand with lowest logical emission, because every corporate I've talked to is, how much is it going to cost? Oh, what's the additional cost piece of it? Because it's most policies are lowest logical available emission, or available fare, lowest logical available emission as well. So that cost piece, that's where I think we have to really refine our game. Sorry, Kit, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, the idea of lowest logical fare and lowest logical emission don't have to be separate either. I think one of the best ways corporates can look at it is if they put a price on their carbon. And so Microsoft and Novartis are really good examples of this. They both have a carbon price of $100 per ton of CO2. And so if you're booking a flight and it emits, then you have to take into account that cost on top of the cost of your flight, and that comes off your department's budget. And the beauty of this is if you're showing it at point of sale and you're actually taking into account the true lowest logical fare, then you should also be taking into account that carbon cost between the two as well, as a way of factoring it in. We think long-term, one of the ways that's going to move is almost in a carbon tax sense, where rather than $100 a ton, you might be looking at what's the cost of the SAF. And therefore, if you're taking a less sustainable flight, that's fine, but you then need to purchase enough SAF to make sure that nets back out to zero. And for context, SAF at the moment is about $700 a ton, so it's really expensive, and it's going to completely change the way that flights are priced. But it is one way of kind of reconciling these two ideas.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, maybe a little bit adding this with the observation of comparing business travel and leisure travel. And I still think, I mean, we all have the struggles, but I think in business travel, the good thing compared to leisure travel is that somebody's making the rules. Mm-hmm. So it's the corporations who have to listen to the reporting requirements, but there is a strong, many strong motivations to make rules and to set enforce. I mean, we see there is some issue with the measurement and what price or how you display and how to make people in the end react. But I think, yeah, we are much further ahead compared to leisure, because there is not a big motivation, I think, for the travel industry to do something, because nobody makes the rules. And so far, the rules from the outside, they are not there as as clear, I think, as in corporate travel. And so from this, looking at, now we know this is the whole of tourism, maybe business travel is some kind of a laboratorium also for the whole industry, because I think all the things you're telling here now, and what there are good thoughts of displaying the data, of calculating, of what I really like, putting the right cost to the service. I think in the end, this is something that the whole industry and the whole tourism industry, whole tourism system can benefit from. So I think there is some struggle, obviously, but I think we're already much further ahead than in tourism as a whole.
So actually, we have a huge opportunity.
Yes, maybe also responsibility.
And a responsibility, definitely.
Yeah.
But also for TMCs, I think, I come back to you, Charlie, but also to Kit, is what role can TMCs play to accelerate this change? Do you think that TMCs need to change, for example, their business model?
I didn't get the second part. They need to change their
business model.
Business model.
I think about that you should become more like an information provider and show the added value they have to your customers.
So I think there's a stat, Kit, I don't know if it was in one of your original slides, it may have been in Olivia's, that right now somewhere between 60 to 80% of corporate clients are saying that they rely solely on their TMC for sustainability education. So certainly that part of it, I think the TMCs have a responsibility to that for a couple of reasons, and I mentioned this on mine. I'm seeing things across multiple industries, across multiple regions, right? And there's a tremendous amount of information that can be shared, legally shared, about within our group, right? Either that's through sustainable committees or whatever, because, and you've heard me say this, I think everybody feels like they have to start at the bottom of the hill, that learning curve, and go up, but particularly within certain industries, the service industries are a little bit, up to 90% on some of the services, consulting and stuff. Their overall corporate footprint is predominantly travel, right? And they've had to jump into this with both feet, where I've seen some of our manufacturing industry, it's not as high a priority, but we can do that learning. So I think there's a responsibility to educate and share that information, absolutely, for sure, from a TMC perspective. I think and I should say this because it's part of my portfolio, but we need to make sure we're providing the right sustainable business tools to manage and the right reporting and the transparency of the information, and help them. What I hear from our clients, they really are looking for us for three things. One is education. Two is help them with demand management, which I was talking about earlier, the volume components of it. So how can you help me? Hey, if I have to reduce, where's the best place for me to reduce? And then the third piece is on the reporting and really understanding where I sit with my footprint. I think those are three ways that we can help immediately.
And your current business model is based upon transactions mostly. So would you dare to advise your clients not to travel, meaning less transactions, meaning maybe less income, or you need to change, like I said, your business model and make sure that you are being paid for the advice that you give to them?
I don't want to address the business model piece here because it's not my bag, but what I will address is we're absolutely having conversations with our clients saying the only way that you can reach that goal is we need to start looking at the volume and the demand management piece of it. Regardless of our business model right now, our obligation is we're working with them, we help them manage their travel. Part of their objective is to reduce the overall carbon footprint. We can't say, oh, we're taking that solution or that lever off the table because we have a business model. We're having those conversations every day.
Yeah, but you had a very hard time during COVID when they stopped traveling, so you know what it is like. So if they still, and we saw that before, that they travel a lot less than leisure travel right now. So I think it's for you also a big challenge, not only an opportunity but also a challenge.
A volume decrease would, like anything else, we had to figure out how we lived with it through COVID, and how if volume significantly decreases, what does that look like going forward? For sure. Does that prevent us from making the right recommendations or having the right discussions? I don't think so.
Okay. You want anything to add? Because I see we have quite some questions, I think. So maybe we can go to that.
Oh, yeah, I'll just add, which is, I think that the TMC for many corporates has to be a source of data and a source of advisory, because again, coming back to how corporates manage their travel programs, you typically have this person called a travel manager, and this person, sometimes a couple people, will be managing huge budgets, right? The travel budgets of many corporates is tens or hundreds of millions of euros every single year, and that's managed by just a couple people. And so they've got to manage that program, their preferred hotels, their preferred airlines. They've got to deal with duty of care, which is a huge thing in the business travel space, but they have to know where every employee is at all times and make sure those people are safe, and if anything goes wrong, to help them. One of our clients, when the Ukraine conflict happened, they suddenly had to work out how to get 5,000 people out of a country. That's insane, right? And then all of a sudden, their CEOs are going, announcing to the world that, great, we're going to have a 50% reduction by 2030, and everyone in the company just needs to work out how that's going to happen. And in many companies, they're not getting huge amounts of support, understandably, because one of our clients is a pharmaceutical company. Their business travel emissions, while very large, are still 1% of all their emissions, because most of their emissions are in their supply chain. So their whole sustainability team, which is quite large, is focused pretty much on the supply chain side, and they're just saying to the travel manager, you work out how you're going to do it. Their job has never been sustainability before. They don't know where to start, and so that's why they need guidance, and they come to their travel management company as their experts in all things travel, and sustainability is a pillar of travel. So it really is a love it or hate it. It's going to be on the TMC. But as you point out, there is the kind of third rail, as it's sometimes referred to, of the fact that sustainability can be bad for business for a TMC. And ultimately, that's a strategic choice of a TMC. We're really lucky with the ones we work with, where they see it as an opportunity to win business, even if maybe those companies might travel less as a result of their guidance. They're still winning huge contracts, so it's kind of better for business overall. And I think that's a really modern and smart approach to take.
So let's go to the Slido questions. So that's the first one. So you mentioned sustainability in business travel is not just about carbon. Are there good measuring and reporting solutions related to social sustainability? I think you might be the best one to answer this one, is it?
I can answer the frustration around it, which is one of the reasons carbon's so good is there's one number, right? Like, we want to stop climate change due to carbon emissions. We talk about tons of CO2e, and everything becomes measure that number, improve that number. How do you do that on a social scale? Like, how do you balance local employment against diversity and inclusion? If someone solves that problem to improve I guess it's all in the question, right? Improve the measurement aspect, then I really think corporates will be able to get behind it a lot more. Whereas right now, how do they justify what they do? It's,
Yeah, I don't think there is good reporting solutions at the moment on social sustainability. One of the points that is also very important is duty of care for corporates. And I talked to I think it was Michael Holmes from Global Rescue during lunch, and we said it has been underestimated a lot over the last years. Nobody takes responsibility within a company. No department, either it's HR or it's security or it's facilities or it's travel management. And since COVID, we do see a change that duty of care is taken a lot more seriously. But with duty of care, it also comes traveler well-being, etc. And this is something that is now increasing, I do see, but we do not yet have good reporting on it, especially not on traveler well-being. I think TMCs now change also their reporting, where you can see the traveler well-being a lot better as a company. Before, there was no attention to it at all. Is that true?
Yes, I'm aware of our company, plus our what I would call our primary folks in the space, have traveler well-being reporting and/or traveler well-being indexes that takes multiple factors and puts it into an index, so you can see the impact of travel, and I should have mentioned this earlier, and I didn't, when we talked about carbon and cost. The third element of that we talk to our clients about is the experience piece too, because if you start pulling some of these levers and you're asking people, hey, I need you to take a multi-city trip, and it spans into a weekend or expands into the next week, there's obviously some impacts there. So when we look at the measurements, it's cost, carbon, and experience are the three pieces of that. And we're starting to see that, I would say, we're starting to see that reporting improve across the TMCs. Good call.
So then it says, how does it help? I suppose they mean travel agents, that Amadeus and Travelport have joined Travelist and will use the Google Flight carbon data and booking travel sustainable.
So, Kit, I'll take it, unless Alfie, you want to take a swing?
No, you're the expert.
Yeah, you are with Amadeus.
I know. I also realize I'm talking way too much for a guy that doesn't like to talk in front of people. So on this could address potentially one of the issues you brought before, where we have multiple methodologies through multiple points of sale. So if you look at Amadeus is a GDS. They have an OBT Citric, right? And then they have TMCs like CWT, and they have corporate clients. So you can start to see where you can align under one methodology. Travelport doesn't have an OBT that I'm aware of, but they still have TMCs, and you can start to address the alignment piece. Now, the quality of the Travelist calculation versus, there's still multiple calculation methodologies out there. That's the piece that you have to weigh. Does that methodology meet your overall, or I think it says here the Google methodology, does that methodology meet your objective? Is it inclusive enough? What does it do with RFI, radius force index? Does it include or exclude it? You have to look at that individual calculation methodology, but having it come from a GDS through an OBT, through a TMC, you can start to see where it would address the consistency piece that you talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. Kit?
You have to be careful in this industry not to burn bridges, right? So Travelist is a really interesting one. So it's Randy mentioned it this morning. It's an initiative put together by Prince Harry, and it has a number of large travel brands attached. And in theory, it's about bringing the industry together to make it more consistent. It has pretty much become synonymous, though, with Google's methodology. And in fact, on Travelist's website, the only framework they link to at the moment is Google's methodology. And that has come a bit under fire. It's still using load factor data from 2019. It doesn't take into account freight. There's a lot of things that are kind of missing on Google's approach. So I think it's good for a consistency aspect. I think I'd like to see Travelist applying more leadership rather than allowing Google to define the direction. Travelist should be defining the direction. And I'm really hopeful that Randy was teeing us up earlier for GSTC to take a seat within Travelist, because I think that could be really powerful, because Travelist is missing the experts. It's missing the people from the sustainability side of the discussion right now. It's just the industry side, which is important, but it needs that balancing. So cautiously optimistic when it comes to Travelist.
Well, see, our time is up, so I think we do need to stop this session. I want to thank you very much for your participation. I want to thank the audience and your questions, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.